Good afternoon. I hope you all hear me. I'm going to introduce now the last but not the least session, which is appropriately called What Have We Gained? And one may also reflect on what we've gained even today listening to these sessions. I'm happy to present Cristina Benetti, who's the assistant head nurse of the operating room at the Jewish General Hospital where I work. She was trained as a nurse in Italy, in Udine, and then worked in San Raffaele, a large hospital in Milan, where she was the head nurse as well in surgery, and came to Canada in 2004, where she rose to become the assistant head nurse at the operating room. So she will not be telling us about why we're late in the operating room and why we can't finish on time, but rather of the beauty as she's discovered in the last year and a half. Thank you, Cristina.
Thanks, Mark, for this introduction. Do you hear me? Just to verify if everything is okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Mark, for introducing me, and thanks also to the American Association of Medicine and Person for this invitation and for giving me the opportunity to share my experience of the pandemic. Today was very intense. The speakers, they were amazing, and I learned a lot. I like it a lot, the title of this conference, Beyond Immunity, because this pandemic is not just about an infectious disease and about how to get immune to the virus, but there is much more. It's beyond being safe and immune. And I will try to tell you what happened to me personally and in the operating department where I work. I will start on March 15, 2020, when we began to have the first cases of COVID in the hospital. I was on my way back home and I was talking on the phone with a colleague of mine. We were wondering what was going to happen, if the chaos that was happening in Italy was going to occur here in Canada as well. We realized that thanks to the work we do as caregivers every day, it seems to us that we were called even more in this situation to a new thing, a new responsibility, and we were called in a first person. This moved me so much because I perceive a new preference in my job, a new opportunity. I never thought I could risk my life just going to work. Therefore, this was a new reality for me. And as a matter of fact, seeing many nurses and doctors who died from COVID, I realized that the stakes were high. I also understood that in certain sense, I was completely alone in facing this situation. When facing a decision where you perceive that your life is at stake, there is a sense of solitude. This sensation was amplified by the fact that most of the people around us could not understand what we had to face as caregivers. On top of this, even as I felt I was facing an extremely personal call and choice, I also had to consider how to protect the people who lived with me. So in the course of a few days, it really felt like my life had changed completely. And that I was facing decisions and circumstances that I never imagined I would have to face in my life. What happened in my hospital? My hospital became the COVID center in Montreal. The administrators started to create COVID patient-only wards. The ICU were filled very quickly and the operating room were closed. Therefore, the nurses were needed in the COVID units. In my department, we dealt with emergency only. SAS, Special Air Service, was built at the entrance of some operating theaters to operate the COVID positive patients. All of these changes occurred in a very short time, with protocols that change from day to day. So we experienced a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos, and a lot of fear. For those who work in hospitals, all these changes are familiar because all of us more or less experience the same things. As we know, the pandemic totally changed the nursing profession. Nurses who were close to retirement left the hospital. Others went back to study. Others chose to work in a private clinic. I saw this change happening in front of my eyes, even among those nurses who decided not to leave. My nurses were transferred to different departments because their activity in operating room was limited. Before they could go in these new positions, they had to be trained. Our nurses don't have experience of direct care of the patient. Thus, after so many years in operating room, they were unable to assist patients in the unit. This created a very difficult atmosphere. Even though we understood the urgency of the situation and we wanted the good of the patients, my colleagues felt removed from a familiar work environment and from daily relationship built over the years. And this made them suffer a lot. I immediately perceived this discomfort and I started to talk to them daily. I met them in the locker room, waiting for them after the end of their shift. I kept them updated on what was going on in the operating room. And I thanked them for their dedication and willingness to accept all these difficulty changes. But the thing that most interested me was to make them understand that they belonged to a place, that they were part of the OR, they were important, and that without them, we couldn't reopen the rooms since we needed their expertise and competence in the surgical fields. Then we were also other colleagues who simply couldn't handle the situation. As we all have seen, COVID was not just about the risk of getting physically sick. The psychological pressure of change, fear, uncertainty, and overwork took an enormous toll of my colleagues. Others took time off because it was impossible for them to work with children doing remote schooling, or because they lived with vulnerable family members. After 1 year and a half, I have a few colleagues who still cannot come back. I have continued to maintain a relationship with them. I call them to see if they need anything. I update them about what's going on in operating room, but mainly I call just to say, don't worry, don't feel guilty. We are here for you. Call if you need. These are just small gestures, but they mean a lot when you feel like you are living through a war. They make people feel like there is still stability in the world and that they are not alone. This is something that became clear to me as we began to deal with the reality of facing the threat of the COVID every day. I remember when the first COVID positive patients arrived in operating room to get surgery, my colleagues were afraid to be with the patient, to talk with the patient, to touch the patient. Even though we were full protective with the N95 mask and all the PPE items, there was a lot of stress and anxiety because everything was new and unknown. It was necessary to show my colleagues that with all the protections, one could be with the patient. Colleagues needed to see a person, in this case me, who was not afraid and who was confident. Moreover, teamwork became absolutely essential. It was necessary to work together in caring for the patient. For example, welcoming the patient in operating room, during the transportation, during the preparation of the patient before the surgery. I learned that it was essential to put myself in the colleagues' shoes and understand that for some of them, the circumstance generated too much anxiety and distress. And it was of the utmost importance to respect them. This was the first phase. When in the second phase of COVID, the second phase, COVID entered in the long-term facilities, which were mainly full of elderly people. These institutions were close to family members. The elderly that were already frail fell ill and many died. We too had to send the nurses to these long-term facilities, but we ran out of available staff. I remember my boss was being pressured by the directors of the hospital to send out nurses from the OR to those places. One day during a meeting, we were trying to see who we could send. I said, no, this nurse is a single mother. We cannot send her. If she gets sick, who is going to take care of her son? Or we cannot send this one either because she lives with her elderly parents. This one is asthmatic. She's too fragile, etc. At one point, I said to myself, but I'm already living in isolation at home. I can volunteer. I can go. I was surprised by myself because I was thinking outside the box and no longer acting as a manager, but I was following the urgency of the reality. Also for me, it was not simple to be a caregiver after many years of operating room. However, the beauty of our job as a nurse has always stayed with me, and the desire to care for the patients are always been the reason of my choice to be a nurse. At that moment, my colleagues were all frozen and taken aback, surprised by my complete availability. And they say, but who will stay here? And I agreed to cover the weekends in these long-term facilities, and during the week, I could continue working in OR. I would like to conclude by telling two episodes about when I went to the nursing home. When I entered that building, I was nervous. At the same time, full of expectation to meet the new colleagues and the new patients. First of all, when I went, I asked to take care of the basic needs for the elderly. Hygiene, feeding, sitting them on the armchair. I remember the first day when I went to look for a colleague of mine who had been transferred there. When she saw me, she asked me what I was doing there. I said, I had volunteered and I had hoped to see you so we can work together. I was looking for a familiar face. She answered me, here it is a hell. They all die. I am afraid to get sick with COVID and contaminate my family. I want to go back to operating room. This was the appalling atmosphere. Little by little, I got to know the patients. I remember in particular a patient who was dying. He was lying in bed, unconscious, and he was breathing with his mouth open. He was in a palliative state with COVID. I never saw anyone enter that room because if the patient does not eat and drink, no nurse goes to assist him. So I went to his bedside and started stroking him, holding his hand, talking to him, calling him by name. He obviously didn't answer. At that moment, a nurse passed by and told me, what are you doing? He is answering. Do you know that he's dying? As if to say, don't waste time. I reply, yes, that's why I am here. The following week, when I turned, he was gone. But I still have those moments in mind, and I'm sure he and I had a really good time together, even though it was for a short time. In this nursing home, at the entrance of each room, there was a photo of the patient with their name on it. I immediately recognized an Italian name, so I showed up at the door and greeted the lady in Italian. She had a stroke, she was paralyzed, and did not speak. When I started to speak in Italian, her eyes started to sparkle, and they looked as if they were speaking, wide open, full of surprise. And she started to mumbling something. Every time I passed by her room, I greeted her. She was happy. She followed me with her eyes. One day before finish the shift, I went over to her and told her, "Do you feel like saying a prayer together?" Then I started praying Hail Mary in Italian, and she started talking and answered me. Then we pray an Our Father, and she was still talking. We were praying together. That's what's going on. She spoke. She remembered all the prayers in Italian, which perhaps no one made her say. I was deeply moved. In that very moment, I understood that I had been sent to that place just for her, and that my task was accomplished. Lots of elderly people died alone without any family members in death. But I had the privilege of being there as a kind of family member myself. We all know that this pandemic has been devastating for us as healthcare workers, but my experience in the nursing home showed me that we were really called to take care of the whole person, to give of ourselves, not just in these extreme cases, but also with our colleagues, with the patients that come in every day. As I say at the beginning, I felt that serving during the pandemic was like a call and even a strange kind of preference for me. As things gradually return to normal, I would like to treasure this experience along with all of my colleagues, to continue to sustain each other and our patients in these trying times. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. Are there any questions for Cristina? Any comments?
I saw a colleague of mine, Grace.
Yeah, Grace.
She said, "I'm very proud to be in the team, our team."
Very
Thanks,
proud
Grace.
of you, Cristina. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Is there what is the situation now in the operating room? What are the effects, shall we say, of all this upside down and everything?
As you notice, we have many new faces, many old senior nurses retired, and soon we have in the end of the year 4 other senior nurses that retire, and this is a huge loss for us. And
a lot of sick leaves also.
Before of summer, we start to teach a new nurses, and as you know, we need many months to train a OR nurse, and yes, little by little we restart again to recreate a new team, and then the OR are open more than before. We are at 11 operating room now, and the problem now is not the nurses but the respiratory technicians that are very limited.
The effects of COVID and the pandemic are still continuing, clearly, yeah. Although not directly as a result of the pandemic, but indirectly. What do you, I think you mentioned that, and perhaps somebody mentioned that before, how do you think the nursing profession has changed? It's a big question, but because of the last year and a half, how there's many parts of that question, I guess. First of all, Do you think that more people want to go into nursing or don't want to go into nursing now? And what do you think nursing as a career has become, or how has it changed? To what is being a nurse different?
I think that for the nurses that they were already working in the hospital, this situation of pandemic became so challenge for them that because it's not just working, they have to deal also with all the problems of the family, husband that works from home, and many of them they stay home, they left the hospital, they couldn't deal with this stress and this fear. I'm not sure if this pandemic influence also to the fact that we have decreased the formation of nurses in university or in the college. But you realize that it's a tough work, is very demanding, is very they request overtime because there is yes, they miss a lot in the floor, and sometimes you cannot say no. You are obliged to stay, and this is not yes, it's not simple.
Indeed, I was speaking with someone who's a secretary of the Department of Nursing at McGill, and they're saying there are less applications now to nursing. I guess people are understanding that it is more difficult, perhaps. I don't know. But thank you very much. I don't know if there are no further questions. I guess we'll conclude the meeting now at this point in time. Thank you very much, Cristina, for your beautiful testimony, and thank you for Grace for being there too in support. And I think we can go on now to conclude the day. I think it's been a roller coaster of a ride. It's been quite something. Starting from life is a beautiful struggle that we heard today, the heart-wrenching testimony or this talk by Fedi, Dr. Fromm, and Lisa as well. We heard that the new thank you is different. Life is a struggle, and then we saw the beauty of the scientific discoveries leading to the COVID vaccines. And we got a sobering taste of what perhaps is the future of I guess those of us who've already lived a fair share of our lives. And the creativity that we heard in dealing with adolescents as well as younger kids on the spectrum, and finally in the operating room. So I'm struck by one phrase that that Catherine had cited, that the knowing how to remain is the first name of every practice of care. Knowing how to remain. And that's something I can take from that, and I connect that with the way you're entering, Cristina, into the old folks long-term care facility, full of expectations but nervous. It is that perhaps that this COVID, beyond immunity, what we have gained perhaps is to know a bit better how to remain in front of those that need our help, in front of our patients, in front of our colleagues as well, and also in front of science, in front of discoveries which take many years sometimes to bear fruit, and then sometimes do bear fruit. So I think on this I'd like to thank all the speakers, thank all the people who participated, all the people who attended. If you have further questions, there's an email that will appear at the end, which also is at the website. But we look forward to next year's MedConference, which hopefully will be in presence. And yes, and have a good evening and have a good rest of the weekend.